So now that the national government of unity has happened, the provincial government of unity in Gauteng didn't happen. And it would appear that the reason for this is that the ANC was scared of the DA. Now, scared, what they really mean is that they were worried that the DA would use their positions to cannibalize the vote in the next local government elections. You know, the ones that are happening in 2026.
This was in the Sunday Times. So Lesufi came out a few weeks ago to say the DA was unreasonable, it was arrogant about positions, it couldn't work with the DA because of its arrogance. And this was the narrative going on for quite a few days until this weekend, where the Sunday Times broke the story that actually Panyaza Lesufi was very, very worried that the DA in powerful MEC positions in Gauteng would use those positions to further the cause of the DA, uproot ANC support, and make the DA look really good by doing what it's supposed to do as a political party, which is to sort of help Gautengers in this particular regard. So because of that, the PGNU, which is the Provincial Government of National Unity, decided to get together without the DA. So it's got Razim Zanzi and IFP and PA there. And apparently this is the strategy going forward until 2026. A minority government for 2 years sounds like a very, very risky proposition for me.
Yes, well, it does and it doesn't. So, there's some interesting things to consider here. The first is actually a marital thing that, a lot of marital counselors will speak to you about, and they call it projecting. So projecting is basically like if I'm a cheater and I cheat on my wife, then I assume that everybody has my habits. So my wife's also cheating on me because I project my habits onto my wife, right? And I think that's actually what's happening here with the ANC, because as we've seen with Panyaza Lesufi, he actually does use a lot of his MEC positions to try to shore up the vote for the ANC. And so what we will recall that in his last term in office, he obviously used his powers to have, remember the 5,000 domestic cleaners that would clean up townships, and then the 5,000, security guards that weren't security guards, and then the 5,000 whatever, where I'm going to give my ANC guys some votes or some jobs so that they give me some votes. So he's kind of projecting here, right? And he's going, well, if I use my positions of authority to try to secure up the vote, the DA would naturally do the same. And so it's kind of understandable why he would fear that. So we have to remind ourselves that Lesufi has some really crazy ideas of things that he wants to achieve. Remember, he told his electorate that he would do things like give them more panic buttons, and he'd make sure that every firearm had every round of ammunition traced and registered to someone. And you couldn't use a gun unless it had like tracer ammunition on it and all sorts of really crazy shit. Remember, your province, Raman, Gauteng, was also going to be cashless because that would stop, all of the transit van hijackings and I don't know, some other bullshit. Well, the reality is he's now got to try to deliver at least on something. And doing those crazy ideas without the support of an opposition isn't going to get you the 50% plus one that you need to be able to basically do anything. So pray tell, how is he going to get any of his dumbass ideas passed, plus still try use some of the ideas to buy himself favors? It's going to be quite a tall order on a minority government.
Well, it really is. But remember, the ANC won Gauteng with 51% in 2019, I believe, and now they're down to 35% under Panyaza Lesufi. He has been Premier of Gauteng for the last 3 years, I believe, or 2 years. And during that time, he spent crazy money on crazy things like the crime wardens that, weren't certified to be crime wardens, like 120 BMWs for those crime wardens that half of them were crashed within the last month. The guy is like the pinnacle of sort of social media culture. So you look really busy doing a lot of stupid stuff that doesn't actually matter to people. What matters to people is having water, having electricity, having a job, educating the kids properly, getting money to put food on the table, the normal basic stuff. And Panyaza Lesufi knows he can't give that to Gautengers. He knows that the DA could give that to Gautengers, and therefore he wants the DA out of power until, the next government election, I suspect. However, Byron, the real interesting question is, how will the minority government work if it doesn't have outside support? Because the first motion of no confidence, EFF, MK, DA could actually vote in favor of dismissing him as Premier. So my suggestion, or my conspiracy theory, is that perhaps he has an agreement with the EFF to have some sort of supply and confidence agreement in secret, and they will pass through everything with the Provincial Government of National Unity to make sure that Lesufi is safe from those motions of no confidences. It's the only way that this works.
So I hear you, and that could very well be the case. I mean, if you think about it logically, right? But yes, Lesufi was actually keen, or he was kind of like banking on the EFF and him having enough votes to get 50+1. But here's the spanner in the works, right? Even with the EFF, he still doesn't have a 50%. And even if you add the PA, it's kind of a 50%, kind of not. Like, it really would need every vote. And they don't really have enough to get that 50+1, regardless of how you slice it, right? And that's obviously why ultimately the coalition with the DA was so important, because that's the only way for them to get their 50+1 definitively. So I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure that the DA would actually side in a vote of no confidence against them. And my reason for that is because don't forget that the DA voted him in. They voted in the ANC speaker, but in return, the ANC voted in the deputy speaker, who was a DA member. Now, the DA has been trying to get that deputy member to resign and basically go to the opposition benches, which would then allow them to basically be formal opposition. But that hasn't happened yet, and until that happens, my suggestion would be that if there was a vote of no confidence called, the DA is not going to call for it. And if the EFF did call for it, that would breach the whole supply and confidence thing. But even if they did do that, I think the DA may abstain until they're sorted out what's happening with the speakers. So, I mean, there are ways to get around it, and that may be one of them. But if you take away the vote of no confidence, you still have to wonder how he's going to get any of his legislative ideas passed, or his budgets passed, or any of the crazy spending bullshit that he wants to do, because he doesn't have the majority needed to certify anything or to sign it off or for actual actioning. So my suggestion is that basically in the next 2 years, what's going to happen in Gauteng is nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Which is a great shame, because if you look at the GDP of Gauteng, even to this day, it is bigger than Ethiopia, it is bigger than Kenya, I think it's bigger than 80% of most African countries. It is the sort of economic powerhouse of this country. It's becoming one of the more populous provinces of this country, despite being the smallest. If Gauteng works, South Africa works. It is as simple as that. But it really seems like political parties of all stripes are like just sending their worst people to govern it. I just don't really understand. The DA has like a Western Cape bias, which I sort of understand. But even they had Import Palatse as mayor, pretty useless. Herman Mashaba as mayor, pretty useless. There doesn't seem to be any sort of impetus to really take back Gauteng, unless, of course, they're going to use these 2 years until 2026 local government election to actually do that. Stay in opposition, don't fall for all the nonsense Lesufi is no doubt going to do, and then maybe they can be the majority party, not with 50%, but maybe with 35% in 2026, and then they can cobble together a coalition with maybe actually say an IFP and all the rest of it. But for now, I mean, Gauteng, the powerhouse, is going to be left behind. And that's a real shame.
Yes, I mean, you have to obviously look at this a little bit more cynically, right? And also say to yourself, perhaps one of the reasons that he hasn't been that keen to side with the DA for now is because, remember, if they side with the DA in Gauteng, remember, they are still in a coalition with the EFF and the PA in Johannesburg. And so that would effectively collapse, right? I can see that the EFF, unfortunately, for everybody in the country, is very vengeful. So whenever they feel that they've been slighted, they cancel all agreements and they collapse all the coalitions and they want to show you who's boss. That's their narrative, unfortunately, which means that in this instance, yeah, I think they'd probably collapse that, like in a heartbeat, and then show Lesufi exactly what they think of him, which would actually cause difficulties in Johannesburg as a whole, because the DA, even if they go on, remember the whole idea between the GNU was that that idea of proportionality in the coalitions would cascade to all the levels, first to provincial and then to local. And it would basically ultimately mean that the ANC in Gauteng would cede some of its control when that agreement cascades to Johannesburg. And what it would mean is that they wouldn't actually be that big a role player in Gauteng, just because of the voting numbers, right? Remember, there's almost a 50-50 split between the two of them. So they wouldn't actually be able to take a position of authority or power in that municipality. And I could see why he might be nervous. Because remember, underneath the existing thing, your mayor is basically a puppet mayor, right? He's controlled by the ANC. He does what he's told, which is why he's never going to work, pretty much ever. But you can see how that would be problematic for the ANC. Again, conspiracy theories, it's just our ideas on the way that we see the land lying. We don't know this for definitive, absolute proof, but all of the analysis and the indicators show us this to be true.
Yeah, indeed. And at the end of the day, it seems like Julius Malema has Lesufi by the balls. If he collapses the local government elections or the local governments, I think the EFF will be very vengeful. But now Lesufi has no power without them. And at the end of the day, Julius Malema is completely in charge of Gauteng. That is the irony of ironies.
Well, not really. I mean, if you think about it, he has no real power anywhere in the country. And arguably, if you want power somewhere, Gauteng is the logical place to have it because, as you said, it's got the majority of the money, right? You're never going to get it in Cape Town, and that's the other place where the money is. And the EFF are like, what, 0.01% of the vote or something? So logically, if you're going to gain power anywhere, Gauteng's probably where you want it. So I can understand the logic.